So I'm really excited that Lynne is here, and please welcome her.
Just going to get over here this. Hello, everyone. So I'll try and keep you awake. I'm not sure where to stand. Maybe I'll stand back here so that I'm not in the way of anybody in the screen. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. If I had known, if this kind of program had been available to me when I was your age, I would be sitting where you are. But it wasn't. And so I'm going to talk about how my career developed. Cheryl asked me to talk a little about my career, and also some of the work that I've done in developing an innovation capacity within an organization. So for me, what I realize now as I look at them is, as I was developing the capacity for innovation in the organization, I was also doing that with myself. And so I'm going to kind of take you on parallel paths on my career and what I did in the organization, and hopefully some of it will make sense. I've had a lot of roles in my career, and some of these are simultaneous. Some of them are boards that I'm on. Some of them are kind of core to my career. So the second bullet down, healthcare, is really where the bulk of my the substantive part of, well, it's all substantive, but the main part of my career has been. So I came into healthcare through a marketing route. I kind of started out in marketing, and then worked my way in this system into various roles, kind of ending with head of innovation strategy, which is where I am now. So I live here in New York. I'm back in New York, and I'll talk about that. But I still have very close ties to this system in Indiana. But I've also had, I've had a lot of work in the museum world. I started a children's museum, and I was kind of the creative force behind it and the strategic driver. And I'm involved with the Indianapolis Art Museum, the Brooklyn Art Museum. How many of you have been to Brooklyn? It's a really great museum, really great stuff happening. And I've had little stints in education, philanthropy, foundations, and world learning. And I put these up not to say, wow, look at all the stuff I have. It does kind of show you. One of my friends says that I have the attention span of a gnat, and I think she's about right. So I always like having a lot of things going on. But I put it up here because if you had asked me when I was in college what I wanted to do, probably not one of those things would be up there. I mean, I had no idea. And so, you know, when I was approaching how I was going to plan and build my career at the start of it, I was a giant question mark. You know, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I laugh and I say my role models and career options. This is really true. If you look at other female role models, I could be a housewife, but I knew that I would slit my throat if that was the only thing I did. So that wasn't for me. I could be a teacher, but I didn't like little kids, so I didn't want to do that. And you know, notice I didn't even think about being a professor. You know, it was more like elementary school. That's where the women were. The women weren't the professors. I could be a nurse. Didn't want to do that. I'm not a very caring individual. I mean, I like people, but I'm not nurturing. You know, I don't like doing that kind of stuff. And then if you were Catholic, you had another option. I could be a nun. And actually, someone told me a lot of people did go into the nunnery after this movie. But anyway, so none of those looked very good to me. So you know, again, when people asked me, as they did, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I don't know. I really don't know. So then I go to college, right? So and once again, what do you have to do? You have to choose a major. Well, you choose your major based on what kind of career you want. I don't know what kind of career I want. So I started with biology because I had a good biology teacher in high school. That's how we all pick stuff, right? And I realize now what I liked about biology is it's very systems thinking, and that's who I am and what I am, but I couldn't have used any of those words back then. It didn't mean anything to me. So I did that, but and I was also pre-med because if you were doing a biology major, you might as well do that. But then I also really like music. I'm a classical pianist, so I was also a music major. And then I was the music director for a summer stock theater company on the Cape, and did things like that. So I graduate with this, and I don't want a career in either one. So what do I do? So then you go to professional school, right? So which one? So I say I'm the only one I know that took the LSATs and the MCATs because I had the pre-med and the GMATs. So I kind of looked at all my options. And in the end, I ended up going to business school because it was the most flexible. I at least knew that much about myself. So I decided to go for the 2-year degree that would give me the maximum flexibility. Okay, so let me talk a little about this. Geography, is it destiny? So I have to say for me, geography was indeed destiny, although sometimes when you make moves, if you know what kind of impact they're going to have on you, you just wouldn't. You know, you'd lock the door in your room and not go anywhere. But anyway, you don't always know. So I started out in Massachusetts. I grew up north of Boston. I went to Tufts University. And when I graduated from Tufts, some friends and I literally sat in a bar and said, where do we want to live? Let's try someplace. And we decided we'd move to the West Coast. So we moved out to the Bay Area. And I don't think that arrow's quite right, but it was somewhere on that coast. And so I lived in San Francisco for about 3 years, where I was a paralegal, hence the law school thought. While I was out there really, I decided what I needed was business school, and I liked the West Coast, and I liked Stanford, and so I ended up applying to Stanford and getting into Stanford. There I discovered I liked strategy, so at least we were getting someplace. I liked strategy, I liked marketing, so that was good. So from there I moved back here to New York, and I worked for a few years at a big ad agency on consumer products kinds of stuff here in New York City. But I had met my husband out in business school, and he too was working in New York with me, but he had grown up in this tiny little town called Columbus, Indiana. And so he had family business interests there, and that's where we moved. And so this is one of those moves that I really didn't want to make. You know, the Midwest to me was flyover country. Give me the East Coast, the West Coast. Chicago's okay, that's okay. But you know, the small town in Indiana, I don't think so. But I will say that because of where I lived and how that community shaped me, I've had a really interesting career that I never would have had anyplace else. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then about 5 years ago, we moved back to New York. I got to say, I like it here better. Indiana was great, but I really love being here. So for me, right, geography has really played. Yeah, I've been influenced by all these places, and I would say if you're open to that and let places help shape you, they do. And you take something important from every place you live. One of the things you take is you're never happy with any place you live because there's always something, you know, something about another community you like better. I actually love going back to Indiana. I do for consulting, but one of the things I like is the service people are so nice there. You know, you get off, you go to rent a car, and they're like, "Hi, how are you?" And they get into these long conversations, and they're just lovely. So anyway, it's there are different things that are great. So let me talk a little about Columbus, because I'm going to move to the work that I did in innovation, which was based first and foremost in Indiana. So Columbus, Indiana is about an hour south of Indianapolis. I don't know, has anyone here ever been? You never know. I know Cheryl has. Okay, so I'll tell you, if you've never been, it's not what you think. And that's what I'd say to myself, too. It's not what I think. It is not your ordinary Midwestern small town. So here's just a sampling of a few magazines who have written about Columbus, because it is known for art, architecture, and design. So here you have this small Midwestern town, 40,000 people, that has a remarkable collection of architecture, 65 to 70 buildings built by prominent architects like Eero Saarinen, Eliel Saarinen, I.M. Pei, Richard Meyer, Robert Stern. The list goes on. It's a remarkable community. It would take me an entire lecture to kind of tell you how that came into being, but basically it was funded by a corporate foundation in town that pays the architect's fees for public buildings if the architect is chosen from a certain list. So the net result is you have this very unusual small community with this beautiful aesthetic. And there's a movie starring John Coe that's coming out that's set in Columbus, and it's called Columbus. And he uses the architecture as a metaphor throughout the movie, and it's quite beautiful. So if you get a chance, take a look at it. It's a little slow paced, but it's good. But the thing about the architecture in Columbus is it's really a manifestation of the community values. So it's a physical manifestation of how the community thinks, which in a nutshell is just because you're small doesn't mean you can't be great. And so what does it mean to be a great community? And that's what people in Columbus, Indiana have been working on literally for decades. And Cheryl's met a lot of the people there. And I'm not making this up. There's kind of this Kool-Aid in town that everybody drinks, and the goal is to make the community a better place and to make it a model community. So if you haven't been to Columbus, I encourage you, especially those of you with design backgrounds, it's really pretty amazing. And so the net result for somebody like me, so this is a shot, this is from a symposium, an architecture symposium last year. That's me in the center. You can kind of see the red hair. And then to my right is Robert Stern, who is the architect who built the hospital that I worked in. Now, Bob Stern is former dean of the Yale School of Architecture and a very prominent architectural historian and preservationist, and has a major firm here in New York. So that's who I worked with on my hospital building. Michael Beirut of Pentagram did our corporate ID and branding. Michael Van Valkenburg, who did Brooklyn Bridge Park, did landscaping. You know, so the names, the quality of design people that you get to work with in a community like this was extraordinary. And so that design and kind of design thinking and the way to approach things started infiltrating myself personally and the community as well. So let me talk a little about about the hospital environment. So Columbus, we're in the middle. You can see Indianapolis to the north, Louisville, Kentucky to the south, and Cincinnati to the east. And so my hospital system was the largest healthcare system in that region. But our competitors, we would say, would be the Indianapolis hospitals and the Louisville hospitals, because you could live in any of that area and go to any of those hospitals, less so Cincinnati. You know, in terms of our size, just to give you an idea, you know, we see about 250,000 patients a year, and our annual revenues are $350 million, and that's just the hospital, not the system, so it's a little bit bigger. And I only mention this because I think the way I talk about the hospital is the same way I talk about the community sometimes. We're kind of that Goldilocks size. We're not too big, we're not too small, we're just the right size, I think, for innovation and change, because we're big enough to have resources to apply to problems and creative problem solving, but we're small enough that you can still get your arms around problems and make things happen in a collective way. And so you can really have more of an influence. And so I think, even though, you know, again, compared to, if you think about the hospital systems here in New York City, they're behemoths and they're academic medical centers. That's not what this is. And so we took a completely different approach when we started down a road on innovation. But because we were smaller, I think we were able to move a lot faster and to be a little more substantive, maybe. So I joined this hospital as their first director of marketing. Out of my ad agency experience, I kind of pivoted into this when I got to Columbus. And the hospital, when I joined it, was a pretty mediocre place. It was not my ideal job. It was one of those jobs I kind of took because I needed to do something, and it was an opportunity. I liked the guy that hired me, who was the COO, who ultimately became the CEO. And so he and I kind of went on this journey with the hospital to turn it from a mediocre institution into an institution of excellence. And like the community was asking, what does it mean to be a great small community? We wanted to be a role model for community hospitals nationwide, because more healthcare is delivered at the community health level than is at the academic medical center level. And we thought we could make a bigger difference in healthcare in the US if we could serve as an example of what a great health system looks like. So where we are in innovation now is in this health system, we have an 18,000 square foot physical innovation center with the Sim Lab. We have a staff of 6 We call them black belts, which is a term from Lean Six Sigma. It means you've gotten a certification at a certain level and you can run projects using Lean Sigma. These black belts also do innovation for us using design thinking and business model innovation and other tools. And to give you an idea of the scope, so within our system, over the past 3 years, they have run 84 different projects which have impacted our bottom line in the millions. We also raise money for innovation, and we've had some key partners. So I put this up to say this is where we are, but that's not where we started, right? You have to get there. So how did we get there? We didn't start with the center. We started with strategy and culture. And so I think, for those of you wanting careers in innovation, I think it's really important to remember that innovation serves no purpose if it's innovation for innovation's sake. It's got to be, so innovation is fun. Yeah, we have fun tools and we do good stuff. But what are you trying to accomplish? Where are you trying to go? How are you trying to advance, right, the impact of the organization you're working with? That's what innovation is for. And so for that, it has to be strategically driven. What are the important problems your organization is trying to solve? How are you trying to have impact in ways you're not? And your innovation needs to be organized around that. And whenever we did anything in our health system like this, I have our guiding principles down there. We always benchmark. So we went out and looked at other organizations that were doing innovation. We looked at other health systems. There were not many community health systems doing innovation. I mean, in Mayo, Kaiser, some of the bigger academic medical centers were doing it. And we saw a lot of organizations where innovation was kind of set up as a sideline. It was like, it was off campus in its own little facility, and they had special projects. Well, that kind of innovation doesn't last, because the minute you've got budget difficulties, that kind of stuff gets cut. It has to be core to what you're doing. So, so we learned from our benchmarking and kind of our own principles that when we set up our innovation competency, it had to be part and parcel of what we were doing strategically. It had to be of strategic importance to the organization. That's mostly what I want to say there. So we started with this strategic agenda of what we wanted to accomplish, and it wasn't until 5 years later that we actually were able to build a center. And we didn't need the center initially. I've come across a lot of health systems, because innovation is such a buzz now, which is good for your careers. There are a lot of hospitals that open health innovation centers, and they have no idea what they're doing in them. They just know they need one, but to what purpose? And so we kind of went at it the other way around. We built a competency, and then we opened the center. So first we had to define what we meant by innovation. And if you look at different healthcare innovation centers across the country, a lot of them are focused on technology. So there's a lot of investing in new technology that will help patients or physicians, which is great. But we said, we're a relatively small community-based health system, and we're not in Silicon Valley, we're not in New York City, we're not going to focus on tech. That doesn't make sense for us. But focusing on healthcare process did make sense, how the care is delivered. And when we started this journey, which was about 2005, 2006, I remember standing in front of our board of directors, and they said, well, this all sounds good, but how can we have an innovation center? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we can't innovate. I said, what do you mean we can't innovate? Well, we don't have we don't have the technology know-how. And so people really were associating the word innovation with tech innovation primarily, and not with process innovation. So I draw that distinction because a lot of health innovation is on tech. Why is innovation so hard? Well, it isn't hard if you're in the right kind of organization. But if you're in a traditional organization that's been around for 75 years and is relatively hierarchical and relatively linear in terms of rules and procedures to follow, then innovation feels like that bubble on the right. It just feels very chaotic. And I think you have to recognize there are reasons that organizations have their hierarchies and have their structure. A good organization works, a good manager works to minimize variation, right? You want things to go smoothly and the same way every time. And what do we do in innovation? We're working on the boundaries of the system, and we're pushing the envelope, and we're doing everything that you're not supposed to do as a manager. So these systems can fight each other in a traditional organization. Now, if you're working in an innovation consultancy or something like that, I think that's different. But you'll be working for clients that are set up like the left. And so you have to realize that. It's not that people don't want to do it, it's just anathema to them. And when you work in healthcare, healthcare is very evidence-based. Show me the evidence and I'll change the practice. And there are reasons for that, and it's about protecting the patients from, do no harm. But if you're really going to innovate, you don't have any best practice to implement. You're trying to invent the best practice, right? So again, just a recognition that you're really working way outside of most people's comfort zones, and you're fighting some systems that are part and parcel of how most organizations work. So what we did to counter that is we developed a framework, in a way to talk about what innovation is at our organization, how we were going to approach it, what kinds of competencies we needed, what kinds of skills we needed. And so this isn't meant to be, this isn't a destination. This is a framework that you're always working within. And sometimes you're at a higher skill level in some of these than others, and you kind of build your competencies over time. But it's really enabled us to talk to talk in a systematic way. One of the things that started us on this journey, we had a site visit by some national examiners of the Baldrige Quality Award. Has anyone heard of that? It's a national program, and healthcare and manufacturing participated a lot in it for a while. But what they do is they send, you submit a major application that describes your organization and why you think you're excellent, and they come in and they pick it apart. And it's actually really helpful in terms of organizational learning if you're on that journey to excellence, which is what we were doing. Anyway, one observation we got in 2005 when they made a site visit was, you guys have great examples of innovation, but where's the systematic approach? And so that's what I took and ran with. It's like, yeah, we do know how to innovate. We have very innovative people. We have teamwork and process and focus on excellence, but we don't have a systematic approach. Can we do this, can we take any team in the hospital and get them to innovate? No. Can we take any department? Can we replicate what we've done across the organization? No. So what my mission was to create that kind of systematic approach in the context of our organization. So this model we call our 5 Ps, and because each category starts with P. So the first one is people, and we realized we needed to have full-time dedicated staff to drive this in the organization. So in our case, we built this on the back of our Lean Sigma program, which I'll tell you is very unusual. Most people don't do that, but we did it, and I'm glad we did it that way. You also need a culture in your organization of people willing to submit ideas and generate ideas and participate in a team-like way. And you also need senior leadership commitment. I don't think any of this would have happened without me in a senior role. And if not me, it had to be somebody else in a senior role. I was the chief strategy officer at the time, and so I was able to make decisions and command resources and kind of get everyone on board. And if you're trying to do something across a whole organization, that's what you need to have. If you're working in a smaller focus in a smaller area, you don't need that. But my goal, I was working across the whole organization. We talk about places. We have people, we have places. So again, as we benchmark other organizations, and we visited non-healthcare too, and this was back about 2004, 2005, they had these beautiful spaces for innovation. And so we decided we needed to have that too. And it was for a few reasons. One is the way that you work on design thinking tools, and you guys know this, is you need that kind of space. You need whiteboards, and you need Post-it notes, and you need that ability to reconfigure space all the time. It also for us was that physical representation that yes, we are committed to innovation, that we at Columbus Regional have an innovation center, and this is where we do that kind of work. So that was helpful. We also have test beds and outposts. So these are friendly departments or friendly subsidiaries where it's easier to innovate. So for example, we have a clinic we call it our Vim Care Clinic, and there's no insurance. The patients don't pay, and there's no insurance. So because of that, it removes a lot of restrictions because the hospital is basically underwriting everything anyway. Then we don't have to play by the same rules we do where we get reimbursement through insurance companies. So you look for things like that, and then other places are technology that allows you to do things collaboratively from various sites. So we worked on that. So we did create this beautiful innovation center, which we were luckily able to do because we were flooded. So we had this horrible flood, and that's a whole other presentation, but the flood was about $200 million worth of damages. We were closed for 5 months. It was awful. But there was a silver lining, and the silver lining is we got to rebuild a lot of the space that had been damaged. And so out of that, I got to create an innovation center. And without the flood, I probably wouldn't have this. We wouldn't have this. But one of the things we did here, I said Robert Stern designed our hospital, and so we're very protective of the aesthetic environment that he created in the hospital. It's a very Frank Lloyd Wright kind of prairie style. It's quite lovely. But in the Innovation Center, we didn't use that same aesthetic. We deliberately chose a completely different aesthetic because I wanted, when people got off the elevators and walked into the center, to know that this was a different place. It's not business as usual. It's something different. They're going to work differently here. They're going to think differently here. So that's worked well for us. So we had people, places, projects. So if you're going to innovate successfully, you have to be working on the right stuff, right? And so how you decide what the work is a really important component. When you're at a junior level in an organization, the work is handed to you and you do it. But as you rise up in an organization, you're asking that question all the time. Is this project more important than that project? Are there projects not even on my list that I should be doing? And so having systems and an approach to figuring out what the work needs to be is pretty critical. And so for innovation, again, we kind of plugged our innovation center into the normal stream of projects that our organization generates. So we don't have a separate process for innovation projects. It's the same process. And so the projects that come through our Innovation Center are strategic, and then they're expertly facilitated. And so this is a little bit of what I was trying to describe. So, projects come from a variety of different ways. In any organization. People come up with ideas for them. There's a zillion different ways they'll come through a pipeline. But at some point, as an organization, you can't do everything. So you have to prioritize. And the reason you have to prioritize is because of what's on the right side, because of resource allocation. You have a limited number of people and a limited number of dollars. So you need some kind of way to prioritize your projects. So we definitely have criteria for how we prioritize our work. And so these are the same criteria that are applied to projects that end up in the Innovation Center. And that's a little nitty-gritty, so I won't spend too much time. But I will say, once a project has been prioritized on the left side, then we decide, okay, is this a process optimization project? So is this a project where we're trying to get more efficiency or throughput, or where reduce the wait times or whatever? Those are good candidates for a Lean Six Sigma approach. Is it a business development rollout? Is it a new business implementation? That's more of a project management. And then there's the innovation bucket. Is this something where, we don't know, we know what questions we're asking, but we don't know what the solution is. And it needs to be very customer centric. And we really need to start with a blank sheet of paper. And so that's our innovation pipeline. And so again, I'm showing you this just to show how it's all integrated and it's not a standalone separate thing. And then there are processes. So again, to be systematic about it, we have to have processes that we follow. And we already had Lean Sigma. So we started with Lean Six Sigma back in 2005. And this was actually a helpful journey for us relative to innovation, because what we found is it took us a couple of years before we could see some kind of returns to the organization. And so we decided we would take that same kind of approach with design thinking. So we decided to adopt a design thinking. So when I talk about Lean Sigma also prior, I'm not talking about the Lean Startup approach, because Lean Startup kind of overlaps a bit with the design thinking a little bit, but more the linear analytical Lean Sigma. So design thinking was the methodology we wanted to introduce. And we were trying to think about, the best way to do this. So what we did is we partnered with IDEO right off the bat in 2011, and we brought them in to do a big project with us. And the team that we worked with there said our staff spent more time with them than any other client they had ever worked with, and that's because everyone was given strict instructions. We wanted to learn how they did it, what they did, and how they did it, and so we were very tightly partnered with them during this journey. So we brought IDEO in, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that project. And we liked what we did with them and said, yes, this is the way we want to go. When we first brought IDEO in, we were frankly testing design thinking, and is this going to work in our organization, and do we like this? We decided yes, and so now what? So we brought in so we've been teaching our black belts basically the design thinking skills just the way we taught them Lean Six Sigma skills. One of the things I was a little skeptical about at the beginning was whether folks that like doing Lean Six Sigma, which is very analytical and linear, would also like doing design thinking. And the answer is some of them don't, but some of them do. And so I think over time we'll evolve to have some lean experts, some design thinking experts, and some folks that can really do both. And it's helpful. The ones that do both like it because they say it gives them just a whole different set of tools. And sometimes they're using more lean kind of tools, and sometimes they're using design thinking tools. But again, this is a very unusual approach. Most organizations, if they have Lean Sigma, it's a completely separate department. And then innovation is a separate department. And they're not always friendly with one another either. So, for us, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So because of our flood, we had such financial constraints, I couldn't hire more people to teach them design thinking, which is probably what I would have done. But because I couldn't do that and had to work with the existing staff who were willing and able, I think this approach actually works better for our size organization. And so I'm kind of glad we got there. And now we have what we call a catalyst program. So we have 6 full-time black belt design thinking folks who do nothing but that. They just run projects. But then we have catalysts. I have about 30 catalysts who have also been trained in design thinking, who can then use those tools and techniques in their everyday job. So they may have projects within their departments or meetings or whatever. And so we're trying to spread it that way. This is just my little philosophy. As I talk to other organizations in healthcare, you read so much about design thinking, and I think people kind of confuse what design thinking is and isn't. And it's a process, but by itself, it's not going to accomplish anything long-lasting in an organization without these other elements, right? If you don't have people that are well-trained, if you don't have senior level support, if you're not doing the right work, if you're not getting the outcomes, you can run the best design thinking processes, but it's not going to get you anywhere. So that's why, again, going back to my framework of these 5 Ps, design thinking is one of our processes. I think it's a really critical process, but it's only a piece of our model. And I talk to a lot of organizations who think design thinking is everything. So our last P is partners. So there we're, and again, going back to Columbus, Indiana, Columbus is a very collaborative community. We do everything together. You know, and it's that saying, you go slow to go fast, right? Sometimes you slow down because you're bringing more people into the mix, but in the end you go faster because you get all the buy-in you need through that process, and then you can move a lot more quickly. And so as we were doing our work here, and a lot of our work as a community health system is about improving the health of the community, which goes so far beyond the traditional medical system, right? So we have to partner with all kinds of organizations in the community. So we're very aware of that. So in our innovation work, we think about 3 kinds of partners. We have our funders. So I said we're lucky enough to have a healthcare foundation that, for example, funded my IDEO project, right? So if I had gone to my CFO, although I did do this, and say, will you fund this project? It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I don't know what the return is going to be. You know, if you're in an institution with very thin profit margins, you know, you're not so sure about that. But the foundation was willing to invest, make that investment to see if it would make a difference, so that next time my CFO might say yes to that kind of a project. So we have funders, we have catalysts. Catalysts are largely our community partners. Sometimes for our projects, we look for where the momentum is, right? So if several organizations in the community want to attack a particular community health problem, and that's important to us too, then we're more likely to be successful at that project than one where it's just us. So for example, the opioid epidemic, right, which is happening everywhere. So we are leading right now a collaborative community approach to what can we do in our community about that. So that would be, so that's where partners are catalysts. And then partners or pace setters, those are the folks that we either learn from or they give us a certain cachet, like IDEO, or both. So partners partners that help us reach kind of beyond what we would do on our own. So how does the framework work? So it's not that we sit around thinking about the framework all the time, but all those elements, the people's, partners, projects, places, they all, you need to be working on all of those in order, again, to have a systematic approach. So here, this is a project we brought IDEO in for. We started with this idea of a connection strategy. And it was really more of a vision than a strategy. And so a better way to connect the dots for patients. And by that I mean the healthcare system is big and awful. And it's hard to figure out where you're going in it. And I say that, as someone that's worked in a healthcare system for 25 years, my parents were recently hospitalized, and trying to, not at my hospital, but trying to figure out how things worked, it's a puzzle. It's difficult. And so we started thinking about Apple and the Genius Bar idea. And what if we had, how might we have a place where someone could walk in with any kind of problem. I assume the Apple bar is working perfectly, by the way. I know it doesn't always do this. But if it works the way it's supposed to, then you walk in with any kind of problem and you problem solve together and at least move your issue forward, right? And so we were thinking, how do we do that? So we weren't talking about, when I say connectivity, we weren't talking about technology. It was how you navigate a system with kind of someone helping you, a personal navigator. It's kind of what, if you know a doctor in a health system, right, what people do. You call your friend the doctor when somebody's sick. Why? Why? Because they know how to do this in a way that the average person doesn't. So how could we do that? So that's kind of what we were looking at. And so if you look at our framework, this was a strategically driven project. It was very high priority. It was driven at the senior level by myself. It was staffed with good people. We had great partners. The foundation was funding this project for us. We brought IDEO in to do that. We had several strong community partners. We were very deliberately using as many design thinking tools as we could to kind of move the work forward and learn. And we were involving a lot of our people in this to build their skill set. And then we were using our innovation center and some of the other places as well. So that's kind of how it works. So what it resulted in is we ended up creating this downtown center that we call Well Connect, and it actually has a medical clinic aspect to it. But I think you can see from the photos it doesn't really look like a medical clinic. In fact, that's an art gallery in there, and we show art, and that's part of it. So what Well Connect does for us is it's a place that's non-threatening because it's not medical or clinical. And we deliberately here, we're imitating the aesthetic here of our innovation center. So we look at this as a hub for us for innovation. And it's a place where we do a lot of experiments around new services. But most importantly, what came out of it is this role of folks that we call connection specialists. And so they are human beings who basically stand there, well, they don't really just stand there, but they are there for anybody that walks in or calls or does an online chat. There's a lot of different ways to access them. And they are problem solvers is what they are. So we have built, so these are some of the ideas that came out of that design thinking session. So for us, we had this meaty strategic, we had a goal, a vision, we had a set of goals, we had a process and an approach that got us to something that we are continuing to experiment with, but that is really starting to produce returns. And so financially, we've been working on this for about 4 years. The clinic is sustainable by itself, but also it's generating higher levels of customer satisfaction, better patient care. I've been talking a lot about finance. I will say that we are first and foremost always focused on better clinical outcomes and better service. But you can't, if you deliver those without paying attention to the bottom line, you can't sustain anything. So, so for us, I feel like we at this point do have, a systematic methodology and a systematic approach that is producing results and that we could then and do replicate for other kinds of issues. So it took us a while, but we got there. Innovation has a lot of different business models. Again, so this is about how do you support it, and we've experimented. I would say different organizations take different approaches, and we kind of use a mix of all of these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So this is not really your takeaway. This was from another presentation. But the question is, how do you get started in an organization? It's one thing if you're building an organization from scratch, or again, you're in some kind of consultancy. But if you are, walking into an organization that has been around for a long time and their core business isn't innovation, how do you start innovating? And so I think it's pretty similar in a way to your own personal innovation journey. I'm not going to read through this, but again, all I'm emphasizing here is that it's a journey and it takes a while, and that we really started in 2005, And it wasn't until 2011 that we opened a fully functional center and started doing projects. And it really wasn't, I would say, until 2016 that I feel we have a design thinking competency that can be taught to others, replicated, and that will continue on, that I'm confident. So really it was a 10-year journey for us to get to a point where we had something really solidly in place that I don't think will go away. I think it's there. So there's an arrow that's not showing there, but that's okay. So if you start on the lower left, I think, in whether it's yourself or an organization, you start with kind of where you are. So what are your innovation assets, whether it's your personal skills and abilities, or in your organization, who are your innovators? Who's doing creative, interesting work? Where is the energy in your organization? I always say there's a million things you can do when you're working in an organization. So why work on the ones where you're going to beat your head against the wall? Look for the projects that people want to do, that have momentum, that have good leaders. So that, and then you work with those assets, those people, to start building a support for some kind of vision, creating a vision for where you might want to go. And once you have that vision and build some champions around it, then you look at piloting, at trying, at experimenting, whatever words you want to use. But you try something small and you go for early wins, and you build that support, that case for support. And then you go through iterative loops, which should be pretty familiar to you guys, to refine that vision and kind of keep going. And so again, the center that I helped build at Columbus Regional Health is operating differently than I thought it would have maybe 10 years ago because of this process, right? Because of how we got there. But where it is a way that's true to the organization and that I know can be sustained and is producing results. So that's the beauty of this kind of an approach. So if I go back to my career path selfishly here, I would say, kind of looking back at my career, I didn't see it this way, but I think my career has really been kind of a series of experiments and learning cycles around certain principles. And you have to decide what your principles are for you, but these were my principles. And I know I articulated some of these to myself along the way, and some of these are more retrospective, but they definitely are true. Gravitate to what you love doing. If you don't like the work you're doing, then there's something wrong. Sometimes it's the wrong project or something like that, but be honest with yourself about whether you like what you're doing or not, because no one wants to get up every morning and go to work and hate it. Build on your strengths. And a lot of times those things are related, right? What you like doing are things where you're using your strengths. So I'm not saying don't address your weaknesses, but recognize what your strengths are and build on those. Make yourself really strong and kind of known for those things. Take risks, but know your personal tolerance. So some of us like taking bigger risks than others, and so we can sleep at night even if we take those risks. People can't. So you kind of have to know yourself. When I think about it in my career, I took my biggest risks when I was willing to walk away from the job. Asking for certain things or whatever. So anyway, but if you don't take risks, I think you'll regret it. Challenge the status quo and make yourself indispensable. And I think these are connected. It's like any organization you work in, I think you want to be the person with credibility and respect. And if you establish a reputation for yourself as someone that gets things done, is credible, is a great person to work with, then you can challenge the status quo and you make yourself indispensable. And when you make yourself indispensable, then you can do whatever you want to do in your organization, which is a really great place to be. And I don't mean anything you want to do, but I mean then when you start having crazy ideas about wanting to try something, or you want to take a career jog and try something else, then people are open to that and they facilitate that for you, in fact. So but that doesn't come just because you ask for it. It comes because you earn it. Surround yourself with great people. Again, these are mine. I can't stand working with people that don't pull their weight or don't add value. So, if you're lucky enough to be at a manager level, then it's your responsibility to move those, either develop those people or move them out. Some people are salvageable, some people are not. If you're surrounded by people like that and you're not a manager, then get yourself on another team in an organization, or maybe you're not in the right organization for you. Again, depends on your tolerance for that kind of stuff. Select for organizational culture. That's something I think I didn't realize early in my career. Organizations have cultures. And, when you're interviewing for jobs or looking at companies, ask people how much time they spend at the office. Do they like the people they work with? What does it feel like to work there? Because organizational cultures are really hard to change. They take 5 to 10 years to really change an organizational culture, and everybody has to be doing it. So it's, once you're there, you're there. So as you look at an organization, think about the things that are important to you, how you like to work, what's important to you in relationships and independence and supervision and risk tolerance and all those kinds of things, and look for that. And then, as they say, reinvent your role at least every 5 years. And this is for me. I said I have the attention span of a gnat. So my job at Columbus Regional, I think I had the same job title for 15 years, but I really completely refocused my work every 5 years, so that I was still responsible for the overarching things that I was always responsible for, but how I spent my daily time was focused differently every 5 years. And then I think there are innovation principles that apply to a career path, So when you're stuck, do something, anything. That was me in business school. It's like, what am I going to do? Well, might as well go here and see where it leads. Build incrementally, just like we do with any kind of work product. Your career is built incrementally too. Think of jobs early in your career as experiments. You're lucky because early you can make a lot of changes. You can try stuff out. If you like it, great. If you don't, try something else. You can pivot. Later in your career, it's much harder to do that, but early you can. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're going to learn something, you'll take it from you. Serendipity is a friend. Who knew I was going to love Indiana? When I think about ending up in the Midwest, which was so not on my radar screen, but again, what kind of a career I've had, how it's shaped who I am and what I do now in New York, it's kind of amazing. Do more of what works for you and less of what doesn't. Have an end goal in mind, but be open to radical reimagining. I really believe that's true. Sometimes you're heading one way and then something amazing comes along, from your career point of view. I was, again, headed down this marketing career. I loved marketing and advertising. That was going to be my career. And then I moved and I had to radically reimagine my career. Analogous learning from other fields and disciplines. One of the reasons I love that I work in healthcare and I work in museums and I work in philanthropy is that each discipline adds something to the other disciplines. And you really do learn a lot by that cross-fertilization and pollinization. Always keep learning, go where the energy is. And the last one, who is paying you? Understand your customer needs very well, right? Fundamental principle in innovation is understanding your customer. So in any job, there's someone, whether it's your boss's boss, but understanding what they need in the organization from you is really critical to being successful. If you can please them, again, you can do the work you want to do. So, and then this is my last slide. So, when you think about your career, it's, for a lot of people think of it as a linear pathway, and I think it's really not. It's kind of hokey, but I thought, well, it's kind of a tree. But, I do think, for me, I had core strengths that I built on: marketing, leadership, strategy, innovation. Those are my core strengths. And I've tried to make them stronger over the years. And healthcare was kind of my core career. But I used those as a platform to do work in these other sectors. And then, I occasionally jump from branch to branch, and I kind of like that, so that it keeps it fresh and healthy. And so I think thinking about your career as something organic that you can't completely control because serendipity comes to play, but that you're nurturing and growing, and give yourself some options. I think it's important, and it's always a work in progress too. So that's it. I am done. Right on time.